So, I just want to discuss something I find extremely important in my research and just that I'm fascinated with. It's etymology, the study of words. Etymology is so deep to our oral history, and it can teach you so much just why a word is what it is. All words are made up. Mind blown, right? Every single word was just a creation. It's a code to organize communication. But a word. And then when we attach a word to a place, that's where I'm really fascinated. Being an amateur archaeologist and having a really strong background in anthropology, the study of human and culture, and I love ancestral anthropology, folklore, legends, and who doesn't like a good mystery? Or a good treasure legend, right? Now, I want to start out by saying I'm not against somebody treasure hunting if they follow the rules. I am extremely against people poaching sites and grave robbing and desecrating areas without permission. This damages and destroys potential irreplaceable evidence. But the study of a single word and the rabbit hole it can take you down is fascinating. And I've always been a firm believer that if we take a map and we can find the oldest map of a local area, and we can see the original streets and their names, and if they're still here to this day, how many times do we take Washington Lane for granted? Why? Because there's 100 Washington Avenues, Washington Lanes, Washington Roads, but there's something very precise about choosing the suffix, the ending of lane instead of avenue or terrace or street or road or alley. A lane of retreat, a line of retreat, a lane of retreat. A lane is something that somebody has created for you to get out of there, and you create a lane with your flank when you're retreating. Your centurions, your guards, of your left and your flank's usually your cavalry. So I happen to live right outside of Philadelphia. Philadelphia was like an epicenter of the American Revolution. And I live extremely right up, my neighborhood butts right up against Abington. He was English. It butts right up against Plymouth Whitemarsh, which my area used to be considered or known as. Washington retreated to the hills, to an unknown place in the hills of Whitemarsh after the Battle of Germantown. Well, I believe those unknown hills are my neighborhood. And the reason they were here is because as we start going down towards Philadelphia from where I live, down Old York Road, we cut through an area known as Orland, Springfield, Flourtown, and Ambler. Now, this was once a very coveted area for most of the colonials, because a lot of these farms, some of them were Tory. This area was very conflicted. You could have a Tory farm on one side of the street and a pro-patriot farm on the other. But this area, Flourtown, there's another etymology. Flourtown, not Flower. Flour. This is the major area that supplied Philadelphia, supplied the whole area with flour and grain. Turwood Road turns into Fitzwatertown Road as you cross over York Road. As Turwood crosses York and it passes the Upper Moreland High School, turns to Fitzwatertown. What a funny word. Well, obviously it's a name. Well, do you know Fitzwatertown Road? It goes all the way down, and it splits at Limekiln. Another name that means something. And it goes right to his house. Fitzwatertown Road went to Thomas Fitzwatertown's house. And it led to Fetter's Mill. So the road back then, sole function was to get that man's flour to the mill so he could have it processed into grain. Both of these people, lineage, were supportive of George Washington. They were pro-colonial. And Turwood Road runs directly past Wynkoop's house, which I believe is an unknown headquarters of George Washington and an unknown temporary encampment after the Germantown campaign and the retreat. Prior to them exiting and heading towards Valley Forge, they stopped here. They didn't stay here long, but enough where you can still see where they were. And they were here because there was fresh water. There were all of the mills, the grain. There were friends. You were in an extremely defensive position that was pre-commissioned because Washington was a brilliant forethinker, and he was a spy master. And this area was set up in advance, and he knew these lands inside and out because he was a surveyor in his younger days. But I digress. So all of these street names are so important because they helped my starting points of my research. Like, why did on these old maps these are the original names of the roads, and they generally named roads either after a person or after something important, and oftentimes just something very blasé, like Byberry. Byberry Road was named because it ran by the berries, or by the berry bushes. Edge Hill was simply named because it ran along the edge of a hill. Lookout Road, or Lookout Point. A lookout is a street that leads to literally the highest point in Montgomery County. And it's almost level with Top of the World, which is the defensive position that sits in Rytharn Farm right behind Wynkoop's house. So the lookout could see everything coming miles away and could see the other lookout and communicate, most likely by mirror or by flag. But it was such a close distance, less than a half a mile, less than a 3-4 minute ride on a horse, that they could just send a runner back and forth with messages. And this gave them a great advantage, being in the two highest points in the entire area, overlooking Philadelphia, overlooking everywhere. Remember, it was documented in history, after the Battle of Germantown, Washington retreated to an unknown area in the hills of an area known as White Marsh or Swamp Marsh, which is modern day Willow Grove. Well, White Marsh was just bigger then, and Willow Grove wasn't named Willow Grove yet. Upper Moreland was here, but Willow Grove wasn't. Willow Grove was named after farmers started planting a bunch of willow trees to dry up all the swamps so they could find some land to plant on and cultivate. So Washington, being a surveyor and a strategic, forward-thinking human, found the highest ground and knew it way beforehand, and knew that that's where he had to get back to if he lost. And it's central. It's central to all the major cities and towns at the time, and more importantly, the creeks and streams were literally the industrial centers that fueled everything. They were, technology at the time were mills. Mills moved millstones. Millstones ground grain. Mills moved machinery, looms that made clothing and textiles, yada yada yada, etc., etc. But we can't overlook how important these words are when we're studying anything. And you should take that and apply it to any kind of research. And it's fascinating, the stuff you can learn just by a street name. And certain names that catch you as, wow, I never heard a street name that. Why is it called that? This is the shame of it is you need permits if you're going to go metal detect. You can't dig because it's a preservation. What has to happen is something called an archaeological survey, where the state comes in and they drill a series of small test holes and warrant if it is an area that deems further exploration. What people don't realize is by doing this, a place such as a preservation, and this is a private trust indebted to the public. And what that means is a nonprofit board of commissioners, they own the land and indebted it to the public for public use under certain rules. They get tax breaks, and nonprofits profit, yada yada. But Rythard Farm was almost sold for development a few years ago, when the trust was really hurting. Since then, a ton of money has been raised and put into that. Restoring the trails has become a lot more popular of an area. You can get all the way from the Pennypack, you can get all the way to Hatboro to Philadelphia without going on a road. So it's pretty incredible area. It cuts through the entire Fairmount Park system, including Larmer, down into Gresham Valley. There are tributaries linking the Wissahickon and the Pennypack. Pennypack flows to the Delaware through the northeast Philadelphia, through the northeast quarter of Philadelphia. I'm not going to get into all that, just the importance of names. It is our history. It's why and who and the origins of a word. It tells you who made up the word. It tells you who was in the area that gave it that name. And if it's the oldest place name given, then they must have been the first people that hiked down that trail that called it that road on a map. I mean, Pennypack Creek was originally surveyed by Thomas Holmes, who called it Dublin Creek. So for all the maps from the 1700s, seeing the Pennypack isn't on there as the Pennypack. It's called Dublin Creek. Now, other maps from the same time call it Pennapaca or Penyaco or Pennypack Creek. It depends if it was a Dutch person or French person that drafted the map, or if it was an English person that drafted the map. English people called it Dublin Stream. But I digress. It's just a quick little snippet on kind of how my mind works. This was how the actual story went. What if the story was already given to us through the things we call Bibles, or spiritual texts, or scrolls? Honestly, it's just the ethos or the creation story of a people. Each pocket, each region, ethnicity, family group had a belief. Common beliefs grew. And religions are used to control, to explain, to guide, to corrupt. But let's take the Sumerian story. Let's go back to etymology, one of my favorite studies, the studies of the origins of a word and why it means what it means and who created the word. So, in our own, not our own, but I was raised and I was baptized, so I'm a Christian, but I am not a practicer, nor am I a follower or a believer in Christianity. I believe it's a nice story, and I believe Christ was a real historical figure that maybe possessed abilities. Could he have been an extraterrestrial, or a person that came from the sky, or a higher transcendent being? Who knows? But obviously performed and showed enough and did enough to be propagated, prophesized, and you see the transformation of a cult into a worldwide top 3 religion. But he was just a person. Maybe. Not even really sure. I mean, Jesus is, comes from the Sumerian. This book was banned by the Vatican, by the way, but the word Jesus, that name, it literally means a mushroom covered in God's semen that came from the sky. So, and there's a lot of circumstantial and anthropological research, done, but it's a radical viewpoint. I mean, it's a pretty well-known thing that Christianity started as a cultic or cultic offshoot of Judaism. It was a cult. They were so strict to their practices that they separated and lived in isolation in the caves, and we only have the story of Jesus and the Dead Sea Scrolls left by these cultic people. It was a story. But the story and the reason the Dead Sea Scrolls are so important is because we discovered them very recently. But we already had our Bible handed down. This is the oldest copy of the Bible, of essentially a text in the Old Testament as well, found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, along with this new stuff from this cultic group, or as I say, a cult at the time, or an extreme zealot, an extreme form of generally what happens is there are a uniformity of beliefs within one religion. There are different characters, there are different heroes, there's stories, there are different epics and chapters and sagas and whatever word you want to give them. So with all that going on, So you have these little groups within the major religion that say, oh, it was this person that really we believed. It was, it was Matthew, or it was, Peter, or, Baptist John, or, like the Masons, not even the Masons, but the Knights Templar, they found the treasures under, King Solomon's temple, and they brought them back, and they got rich and they got wealthy, and they found John the Baptist's head, and they worshipped it, which the King of France then used against the Knights Templar and had them all rounded up on that infamous day, and is why the day is considered unlucky. Friday the 13th, rounded up all the Knights Templar after returning from the last crusade, and had most of them burnt at the stake. Some of them escaped and south of France, and they formed Switzerland. Yeah, the Swiss is just an entire country that is literally created from escaped French Knight Templars that were being hunted by the king, and then they moved to the mountains, armed themselves, and then when the king tried to pursue them further, they lost every time, eventually having to cede the land, forming its own country. Why do you think Switzerland is to this day still known for its insanely good banking? And Knights Templar invented banking. Yeah. And I'm a direct descendant of those Knights Templars. So kind of a cool thing, but you see where all these crazy stories and words can take you. But, back to the Sumerian thing, because I will babble. I have ADD. I will go off on tangents, but if you stay and listen long enough, you'll probably learn something or find something that you find interesting. So the Sumerian creation myth spills over into the Old Testament, into the very names Adam and Eve, and to the very location Eden. They are not words in Judaism. They're not words that the Jews used at all. They're not even their language. They're their names created on how the Israelites heard or interpreted the translations of the peoples that came before them. The Sumerians were the ancient civilization that Jerusalem, Israel, that they were building on top of. And when they translated and understood this cuneiform and read these creation stories, like Nebuchadnezzar, there was a male android or slave race that the gods came down and created, and the male version was called Autonomous or Adamus, which is where we get the name Adam from, and the female version of this genetic slave created by some advanced culture that came down to the earth, created Evanus, which became Eve. With these genetic slaves that they were creating, using some of their DNA and some of the smartest, primate they could find, we are just a combination of an alien fucking a monkey. Seriously. Not seriously, they probably didn't screw them, but they, you know what I mean. It's the combination of crossing their genetic and the smartest primate they could find genetic, making what eventually became us. And so yeah, these people came down, and there were apparently two brothers that were sent down from a planet called Narubu. Narubu was dying and needed gold to fix their atmosphere, their problem. Well, Narubu had a king. He sent his two sons. One was a bastard. One was... There's a bastard, really, it was an illegitimate son. And then he had his true son, which was the heir to the throne of the king of this planet. These people were known as the Anunnaki, which is where our word angel came from. You see etymology again. The only known origin of the word angel is from Anunnaki or Anaka or Antaka. Yeah, there's different mutilations of the word over time, but it was created by the Sumerians in their description of these giant type winged humans with giant kind of cone shaped heads with big craniums. And well, they were the fallen ones, or the people that came down from the sky. And the one brother followed his dad's word to the T. But the other brother fell in love with humans and the people, and made friends and gave them knowledge, showed them architecture and city planning and engineering, and gave them fire and gave them all these technologies. They were bringing civilization and agriculture.